This podcast is a proud member of the Fan Hub 100. Football without fans is nothing, so we've partnered with Fan Hub to put fans first. Search Fan Hub app to play your part in the journey.
Welcome back to another Mackem in the Middle podcast and another match preview on the channel. Obviously, our last game was against Rochdale, which we won 2-0, albeit not the best performance, but another 3 points, another clean sheet, another McGeady assist, and another Charlie Wyke goal. But our next game is on Tuesday against Portsmouth, which we've always had trouble beating, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. But joining me to preview the game, I suppose, is Freddie. How are you getting on, mate? You well?
I'm doing all right, thank you, mate. It's a bit of a change of opinions on Portsmouth since the last time I was on, but I'll tell you a bit more about that later on.
Yeah, obviously it's been a mixed season for Portsmouth, as have all the seasons really that we've both been in the same league. Obviously, it's our third season together in League One. All 3 seasons we've both failed to get promoted. But what have you made of the season so far from a Portsmouth point of view?
Well, it's been mixed to say the least. Obviously, the last time you had me on, it was around time when that very good result for Portsmouth against Sunderland at the Stadium of Light. We started to get that tactical philosophy going of an aggressive 4-4-2, and it worked for a long time. It worked pretty much right until Christmas. There were some ridiculous records in there. There were 6 clean sheets on the spin in all competitions, and the team it was a system that definitely got the best out of Portsmouth's players. With that being said, now, as I'm sitting here, you can completely disregard that almost entirely, because they have been to that tactical system, and for several reasons that I'll go into in a minute, the Portsmouth players and the management have fallen off a cliff.
Yeah.
Good news for Sunderland fans out there.
Hopefully it is. But obviously for the 3 seasons we've been in League One together, I think Portsmouth and Sunderland have had very similar traits. We've both got on paper 2 sides that realistically should be up there every single season. There's been some seasons which have been better. Obviously, Sunderland just missed out with a last-minute winner in the playoff final against Charlton. Portsmouth, we did beat in the semi-final. But on paper, we've both got really good squads, but it's just inconsistency, isn't it, with the 2 teams?
Yeah, inconsistency is the big one. And it's not just patchy inconsistency as well, because obviously every side, especially in League One, has bad games. You're going to have defensive errors. You're going to have games where your star striker just doesn't take any of his chances. You're going to have that. Yeah. The difference now, and this reminded me of Sunderland at the beginning, is that it's inconsistency, and I don't see any way out of it. There appears that there's no tactical setup to get the best out of the players now, since the 4-4-2 was shelved, mainly because of the patchy form and the fact that teams are playing Saturday, Tuesday from now until the end of the season. I think there's only like 2 weeks where Portsmouth aren't playing Saturday, Tuesday from now until the end of the season. So players are tired and they thought, you know what, we can't play the high pressing 4-4-2 anymore. Fine.
Yeah.
They've been struggling to get a formation and a style of play ever since. And it's gone back to the direct football, which Sunderland fans will remember Portsmouth doing in the playoff semi-final, where Portsmouth lost.
Yeah.
And they will remember from last season where the team lost in the playoff semi-final against Oxford United. And that was the setup that they had before the Sunderland game this season. And they've gone back to it again. Not only that, you have more defensive errors from players than usual. And what's even worse, the Saturday's game against Northampton, where Portsmouth were 4-0 down at half-time to a relegation team.
Mm-hmm.
The player, I hate saying this, the players looked like they weren't trying, and I have a reason why. And you might find this interesting. On the 10th of February on 2021, there was an article in the News Portsmouth by Neil Allen, the local paper, the equivalent of Sunderland Echo, where the CEO, Mark Catlin, said, to paraphrase, that wage expectations must be lowered despite the end of the salary cap. Basically, because of COVID and the fact that the club has lost significant amount of money. I think in the summer they projected to lose and were losing £700,000 a month. That all 11 players coming up to their contracts expiring, they would expect to have to be signed on reduced wages.
Mm-hmm.
And the form, since that article, I don't need to go into all the details, but you can imagine why the players will be upset by this.
Yeah.
The form after that article was released, 1 win, 1 draw, and 4 defeats, including conceding 3 goals to Bristol Rovers and 4 goals to Northampton Town.
Yeah.
So that's the situation that Portsmouth are in at the moment.
Yeah. Well, the last game between these two sides was obviously back in October, I believe it was. Obviously, Portsmouth won 3-1. Marcus scoring 2 of them, and Charlie White getting the goals for Sunderland. From the Sunderland point of view, a lot's changed since then. Obviously, the main thing being the manager. Phil Parkinson was the manager of Sunderland then. And, you know, ever since he walked through the door, he just never seemed to be the right man for Sunderland. The football was poor. We weren't getting the results that we needed. And we always seemed to crumble in the big games, as we did against Portsmouth. But from then and now, what's the big difference between Portsmouth side?
Well, I'll start with the tactical setup. They don't play the same style of 4-4-2 anymore, so they're not going to set up in the same way as they did the last time. Last time they started off from memory with John Marquis with another attacking midfielder like Marcus Harness next to him, with Ronan Curtis on the left and Ryan Williams on the right. All very high pressing, fast forwards who work their socks off the ball and stop Sunderland from playing out the back with their 3-5-2. Portsmouth aren't going to play that anymore because Kenny Jackett has decided that system doesn't work. So what I expect, they will set up maybe in a 4-4-2 again or a 4-3-3 with an extra man in midfield. And they will look to try and play the direct ball to the wingers.
Yeah.
To hopefully catch the Sunderland defenders off guard, and then put crosses into John Marquis or Ellis Harrison, a more target man striker, if he starts. And I mentioned earlier that system has not worked. Portsmouth have not created the same amount of clear-cut chances that they had previously, and they look like a shadow of their team going forward. And defensively, it's the same back four. Portsmouth always had a back four. The main change has been Jack Watmore not playing at centre half.
Yeah.
Arguably, he's the most well-rounded ball-playing centre half Portsmouth have. He hasn't been starting. Instead, we have Sean Raggett, who is a very good League One centre half in terms of dealing with crosses, man-marking players. But his main weakness is dealing with a fast player running at him with pace. So, for example, if in the middle of the game Sunderland swaps sides and Aidan McGeady is on that side attacking Sean Raggett, he's going to get clear opportunities every single time.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, how happy are you that Aidan McGeady's actually playing?
I dread to think where we'd be without him. Obviously, like I said, we just talked about the Rochdale game prior to recording this one, and one of the things that I mentioned to Michael, who was doing it with me, is obviously before the season's but the early season, Parkinson just didn't play McGeady, and we struggled to break teams down. We struggled to create chances. Lee Johnson came in and brought Aidan McGeady back in, and he's now top of the assist tally in League One, despite playing 4 months less than everyone else. So it just shows how important he actually is to the team.
He's just a bit of a good player, isn't he?
Bit of a cheat code, I think is the way of putting it.
So,
but it's an interesting one with McGeady because he's still 34 years old. He isn't the quickest. Obviously, as you get older, you do tend to get a little bit slower, but he just has that quality that not many players in this league tend to have. He can beat his man going either way, and you've seen it a couple of times yourself in this league when we played you before. He can just create something from nothing. It's very similar to what I imagine Marcus Harness is like, who I was going to get on to. Obviously, I'm not entirely sure which side he plays on. I think he has played on the right a few times.
Usually the right-hand side. Sometimes he's played as an attacking midfielder. Sometimes he's played up front alongside John Marquis, and I think that's worked very well because He's a fast, technical player, loves the ball at his feet, can definitely skin a player. Against Gillingham, even though Portsmouth have been playing badly recently, against Gillingham in a 1-1 draw, he skinned 3 players and then put in a pinpoint cross to a centre half. And
he
that's
loves
the
the goal
sort
against
of
us as well.
that's the sort of quality that Portsmouth have in this side when they are tactically deployed properly and when the players have confidence in themselves, which neither of those things are true at the moment.
Yeah. A lot of the goals that Sunderland have scored this season, and especially under Lee Johnson, have came from crosses, whether that be McGeady from a cross on the left or Jordan Jones, who's started playing a bit more often. We seem to get a lot of balls in the box now. Charlie White's obviously on fire this season, 20 goals in the league. I think it's 25 in all competitions. What have Portsmouth been like this season defending them crosses?
Before this dreadful form we're on, ever since that article actually, Portsmouth are usually good at creating with crosses. I mentioned Sean Raggett earlier. That's his key strength. He wins those headers, and and the back four is usually very structured. So they're very rarely going to be letting players have free headers. Usually, now the defending has been woeful, mainly due to individual errors. And I think pretty much all of those 6 games that I mentioned, there has been some sort of individual error, simply because I don't think the back four trust each other anymore. Yeah. So, for example, I genuinely think any way that Sunderland will attack Portsmouth, there will be problems. Portsmouth will be defensively shaky in this upcoming game. And there's one key stat which Sunderland fans need to hang their hat on. Portsmouth haven't won a game in all competitions where they have conceded the first goal in over 2 years.
Jesus.
2 years.
That one.
So if Sunderland go on the offensive early and score in the first 10 minutes, the game's done. I'm not exaggerating. The game's done because Portsmouth cannot break down a structured defensive line. So Sunderland score early and then just set up and keep possession and keep their shape, then they will easily win this game. Even if it's only by a goal, they will easily win that game.
Yeah. I think a lot of the goals as well, which probably doesn't sound particularly good for you, that Sunderland have scored this season have actually came in the first 10 minutes as well.
Well, we know what's going to happen on Tuesday, then, aren't we?
It could be an interesting one. It'll be a close game, I think. I think it'll be closer than what
you are giving this side at the moment way too much credit. It's not going to be a close game.
One thing that someone mentioned to me before, I'm not entirely sure if it was true. I've just went with it because they told me. But I think the last time Sunderland won away at Portsmouth was over 24 years ago. I think it was. And obviously, a lot's changed since then. We're now playing games behind closed doors. How much do you think that'll, I suppose, impact the game, not having the fans there, not having the atmosphere there? You know, as we all know, Sunderland Portsmouth has become somewhat of a derby, I suppose, in League One, since we dropped down to this division. You know, how do you think it'll affect the way you approach the game with no fans?
Yeah, it's definitely been a competitive rivalry of Portsmouth and Sunderland, hasn't it? With both sides being down there. Fans not being in the stadium has definitely had an impact on how Portsmouth are playing and essentially how decisions are made. There's a lot of toxicity towards some of the players, a lot of toxicity towards the management, simply because it was confirmed today that Kane Jackett will not be sacked, even though this terrible run of form where Portsmouth look completely dreadful, even though they're still in the playoffs by 2 points. They're not the same team that you saw at the Stadium of Light earlier in the season. And they're not the same team that were top at one point this season either. So if there were fans in that stadium, and let's say Sunderland get the early goal and it's 1-0, and it drags on, it will be a toxic atmosphere, and that could that could result in 2 things: either it galvanizes the players and they play better, or they shrink into themselves for obvious reasons. But without the fans in the stadium, if Portsmouth go 1-0 down, the players will shrink into themselves. There have been many interviews, such as Jack Watmore and Tom Naylor, both key players, who have said they are struggling without the fans being at games. Because obviously footballers didn't become footballers to play in empty stadiums.
Yeah.
And even though the pressure on those players is great, obviously with the history of Portsmouth and the expectation to get automatic promotion this season, that pressure is what some players thrive on.
Mm.
And that being missing really has had a bad impact. But at the moment, considering how they're playing, I would not want to be one of those players playing against Sunderland on Tuesday night if fans are in there.
Yeah,
the atmosphere wouldn't be nice for them at all.
Yeah, I think it was very similar to Sunderland, obviously under Phil Parkinson, especially in the second season. They did get cut short. We were losing games that realistically on paper we should never be losing if we want to get promoted. And I think the fans there did get frustrated at times. But obviously, your last game was against Northampton. You lost 4-1. And as you've touched on, if someone get an early goal on Tuesday, it could be an interesting game. But do you think if Portsmouth had got something out of the Northampton game, it would put less pressure on? I'm not sure if I'm wording this right, but it would put less pressure on Portsmouth to come from behind on Tuesday, if you know what I mean? Because obviously you've conceded 4 to Northampton. If you go 1-0 down on Tuesday very early, the frustration starts to kick in a little bit more. How do you think that will change the game, having just been, I suppose, hammered off Northampton?
Well, the side's confidence is probably at rock bottom after that result. And I'm not exaggerating when I said this. I watched the first half, and then after going 4-0 down, I hate to say that I couldn't watch it anymore, simply because it was one of the worst halves of football I've seen Portsmouth play since I started supporting them. That was how bad it was, to give you an idea. It's not even fully up to the players now, because as you've seen with Portsmouth, they can on paper they can have talented attacking players. They can have Marcus Harness, Ronan Curtis, John Marquis. They can have Tom Naylor in the middle, who's one of the best all-round centre midfielders in this league, arguably. You could have Craig McGilvery, who is statistically the best goalkeeper in this division for preventing goals. You can have all of that, but if there's no clear tactical setup and no consequence for losing, then what incentive is there for the players to play better, and B, the management to get the club out of this mess that they're in?
Yeah.
The fact that Portsmouth are actually still in the playoffs by 2 points is shocking to me. There are it sounds weird that I'm taking a lot from this 6-game sample after that article was released, but that is genuinely how Portsmouth are playing at the moment. They are playing that badly, for one, and B, the fans aren't surprised about it, which was what makes it even worse. So, going back to your question, that game is probably a wake-up call for them to play better for themselves. But again, without clear tactical direction, it doesn't mean anything. Yeah,
I'm just looking at the table now. Obviously, as you've said, Portsmouth are 6th, Sunderland are 4th. But looking at the form, as you've mentioned before, you've won 1 in your last 5. At least that's what it shows on here. I'm not sure if it's more than that, but that is actually the worst form in the top 13. Top 13.
Mm-hmm.
How confident are you, if at all, that Portsmouth can, keep in the playoffs, or even potentially push up into the automatic? Because obviously there is a 10-point gap at the moment. Peterborough in good form, Hull are starting to get their form back together. But as we've seen, I think Sunderland were 13 points from top a couple of weeks ago. Now we're 5 points from top with 2 games in hand. The table can change any week. If you win one game and Lincoln lose one game, then the gap is even smaller. How confident are you that you can actually push on for the last, I think, 14, 15 games of the season and actually achieve something?
Okay. Am I confident this side will get promoted? 0. Am I confident this side could realistically, potentially end up in the playoffs by the end of the season? Marginal. If, for example, the players galvanise themselves and Cane Jacket falls back to that 4-4-2 system I've been going on about for the last 20 minutes, they could realistically end up in the playoffs.
Yeah.
But looking at the previous playoff form that Portsmouth have had, and these incredibly regular patches of poor form, and the fact that arguably this side hasn't improved in 3 years, there is no confidence from me at least, and no confidence from the rest of the fans that this side can actually get promoted.
Mm-hmm.
Can this team potentially stay in the playoffs? Yeah, they can do. If, for example, there's a big team meeting and the players decide, look, even though we might not stay here because of the wage reductions, if we play well for ourselves, we'll get a better contract elsewhere. That can happen. And then and Portsmouth have the individual players that can drag them through certain games. Kind of like how Sunderland did under Phil Parkinson. You could look at it and go, well, if certain players play really well, Sunderland could win a game without any tactical nuance whatsoever, and Portsmouth can do the same thing.
Yeah.
Marcus Harness can hit a ball on the sixpence into the top corner from 20 yards, or John Marquis could get that one chance in the penalty box and score, and then they could just sit 10 men behind the ball and win the game. They could do that. But there's no sign at the moment that they will.
Yeah. I will move into the team news from the game. Obviously, Sunderland are currently low on numbers, is the easiest way of putting it. Obviously, Denver Hume still out, Bailey Wright, Tom Flanagan, Jordan Willis, Conor McLaughlin, Carl Winchester, Ross Stewart, Lyndon Gooch, all are still injured. Lyndon Gooch, Carl Winchester, I think, are probably the what's the best way of putting this? Well, I suppose closest to fitness. They're the least severe injuries. Obviously, Jordan Willis is out for what I think will be the season. Grant Ledbetter as well, who I haven't even mentioned, is out. Albeit I think he does want to play on, despite dislocating his shoulder, which is an interesting one. But is there any players missing from the Portsmouth team on Tuesday that could prove to be a real miss for Portsmouth?
The big injury is the right back, Callum Johnson. Portsmouth got from Accrington Stanley. He's been the first choice right back pretty much for the whole season. Solid B+ player in all areas, can go forward really well, can hit a cross, but is also defensively reliable. He's injured, and also Portsmouth's backup right back, former England under-17 international Haji Manoga, got a groin injury last week. There's been no news if he's fit. So most likely the player to fill in at right back will either be James Bolton, who is a very, very defensive right back. He hasn't got a lot of quality going forward. Yeah. He might fill in, or it might be Jack Watmore playing out of position at right back, which obviously playing your best centre half at right back isn't a good idea. Other injuries: Michael Jacobs has been injured for a while. Left winger, incredibly solid, incredibly creative. One of the more underrated signings that came in for Portsmouth this season, but he's had a string of injuries, so hasn't played as consistently as I would have liked.
Yeah.
Apart from that, no injuries, which makes everything I've said earlier a lot worse, because it's due to the fact that Portsmouth haven't had 10 injuries. What? The only thing they've got missing is 2 right backs and a left winger. It's bleak at the moment.
It certainly is. The one thing I will ask you for is the team that you think will start for Portsmouth, if you had to predict the 11 that will walk out on Tuesday.
Right. I can't give you a formation because honestly I have no idea. It will definitely be a back 4 though. So I assume Craig McGilvery will start in goal. Left back, Lee Brown played dreadfully in that last game, so I'm going to go Charlie Daniels at left back, ex-Bournemouth player, if you know him.
Yeah.
With Sean Raggett and Rasmus Nikolaisen, the centre half on loan from FC Midtjylland. They'll start at centre half, but if Watmore starts ahead of Nikolaisen, I won't be surprised. So assume that's the change. And then at right back, I'm going to go with James Bolton because he's the only natural right back Portsmouth have. The midfield, again, I have no idea how they're going to set up. If they want an extra man in midfield, or if they're going to go with the 4-4-2 again. Let's assume they go with a 4-4-2. They will have Curtis on the left side with Ronan Curtis, Republic of Ireland international, with Tom Naylor at centre midfield. Even though he's knackered and his form's dropping off, he's the only player who gives defensive structure in that centre midfield. So he'll start with centre midfield. I'll go George Byers on loan from Swansea. Very good playmaker. Shouldn't be in this division really in terms of the technical quality he has, but he lacks the defensive side of things.
Yeah.
Right midfield, I'm going to go with Marcus Harness, who we mentioned earlier, technical player, excellent in my opinion. And up front, I don't see John Marquis not starting in this game, even though the manager has dropped him on occasion. He's underplaying his expected goals, but Portsmouth don't really have any other choices in that strike up front.
Yeah.
So I'll go with John Marquis and Ellis Harrison up front, two natural strikers. But bear in mind that I could be chatting nonsense. I have no idea what team's going to be put out. It could be entirely different to what I just said.
Yeah.
Bearing in mind that the past 6 games have been that bad that Cane Jacket has gone through about 3 or 4 different formations and combinations. He's tinkering a lot. And has completely binned that side that got that 3-1 result at the Stadium of Light earlier in the season.
Yeah. I think it's very similar to Lee Johnson and Sunderland as well. I think they change the team almost every week. I think we've played a 3 at the back, a 4 at the back, a 5 at the back, a 4 at the back with wing backs as opposed to full backs. So I think it's very similar, albeit for different reasons, that Sunderland could make a few changes.
For good reasons.
Possibly. Obviously, Chris Maguire always likes a game against Portsmouth. He hasn't actually started a game under Lee Johnson yet, so he could start. Obviously, Charlie Wyke is a shoe-in to start. Aidan McGee likewise, but it'll be an interesting game for sure. But the score predictions for the game, what are you going to go with?
I'm going to go 3-0 Sunderland.
3-0 Sunderland.
Mm-hmm.
Is that with an early goal as well?
Potentially. It's with them scoring first, obviously.
Yeah. Well, actually, I think I'm going to have to search this after, but I think a lot of our goals this season have actually been in the 6th or 7th minute. Obviously, we did against Rochdale, scored in the 6th minute, and I can probably say another 4 or 5 times that we've scored in the 6th minute this season as well. So, with your record of conceding early and losing games, and our record of scoring early and winning games, it certainly sounds like it could be a Sunderland win on paper, but we all know football doesn't work like that. It's never that easy, despite how pessimistic or optimistic we may all be. But it could be an interesting one for sure. And also it's on Sky Sports as well.
Oh God, I've got to actually watch that game.
Sunderland never performed very well when we're on Sky Sports as well, so I suppose that bodes well for you as well.
Well, Portsmouth don't either, so we're both being very positive about this game, aren't we?
Definitely sounds like it's not going to be one for the neutral, then, isn't it?
No.
Traditional League One game. But that is all we have time for today. I appreciate you coming on, Freddie.
No worries. I hope Sunderland fans are enjoying their season, and I hope they're all taking care in this weird time we're in. And it's good to see a club with ambitions to change their management when it's going wrong. I think a certain team down south could learn a thing or two from that.
Yeah, I think we all like to see someone get promoted, but I think, you look at some of the clubs in League One, they shouldn't be in League One. You've got your Sunderland, Portsmouth, Hull, Ipswich. Realistically, all 2 big clubs for League One. One day we'll all get out of it. One day we'll all be playing back in the Premier League, but who knows when that will be. We might not even be around for them.
That's all, folks.